With any great disaster, there's always the build-up, and so we need to go back a couple years, all the way back to the release of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, with it initially being an episodic story focusing on Yugi Muto facing off against dangerous villains in various games. But out of all of them, one game stood out from the rest: Magic and Wizards, what we now know as Yu-Gi-Oh! This chapter sent readers into an absolute frenzy, with Shonen Jump being flooded with requests of how to play Magic and Wizards, or where fans could get the cards Yugi was using in the manga. And so to capitalize on this response, Takahashi brought back Magic and Wizards for a second time in a Death T arc, where Kaiba attempts to enact his revenge on Yugi, albeit a significantly more deranged version of Kaiba that you might be used to. And by deranged, I mean so deranged that he hires 3 professional hitmen, puts Yugi and friends into electric chairs, tries to guillotine them, crush them with falling bricks, and only after does Yugi survive all of this, he gets to duel Kaiba. Oh, and Grandpa Yugi subjected to brain death if Yugi doesn't participate. Within the actual duel though, Kaiba mounts pressure against Yugi with his 3 blue eyes, until Yugi's final draw, where he reveals he's assembled all 5 pieces of Exodia, and obliterates Kaiba's 3 blue eyes. And if this duel seems familiar to you, that's because it's the basis of one of the most famous duels in the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, albeit with Kaiba's attempts at Yugi and his friends' lives removed. There was clearly something special about this duel, and Exodia, as it resonated with fans not only with Japanese manga readers, but with a much wider audience for the later anime adaptation. And with this duel being even more epic than the last, along with the fan response being even stronger, there was clear demand for an actual trading card game. And so on February 4th, 1999, Volume 1 was released by Konami, marking the first true beginning of the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. What's important to our story though is actually the release of Volume 3, which had released
Exodia! Obliterate!
Exodia is one of the most iconic cards in the entire franchise. The duel it's been involved in are some of the most famous in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. This is all to say that the release of Exodia caused many players to be ecstatic. They were finally going to be able to play like Yugi in this duel against Kaiba. Exodia represented the very core of Yu-Gi-Oh's philosophy, that even the weakest of cards can come together and beat the strongest of opponents. But as more and more players ripped open booster packs, they found out while they were pulling Exodia, they weren't pulling every piece. They were pulling a single limb, the left leg if we're going to be specific. As it turned out, Konami was opting to do a staggered release of Exodia, and instead of releasing every piece in the same booster pack, the original Japanese game decided to instead milk the player base by incrementally releasing every limb of Exodia in different products. Strangely, the right and left arm came with a promotional video game guide, and the right leg came with Volume 4. But alongside the build-up of Exodia, the card game was still very much in its infancy. During this period, the mechanics of the game were essentially the Wild West, and the game was incredibly poorly designed. And while it may seem strange in hindsight, the Yu-Gi-Oh video games were just as popular as the physical card game, if not more popular. And so to capitalize on the success of both the video game and the card game, the first wide-scale tournament was ever set into motion. And so on July 1st, a call was sent out. Across Japan, select players received an invitation in the mail, with familiar symbols etched into the envelope. Within the letter was a ticket to the tournament to be held on the 26th of August at the Tokyo Dome. Alongside the ticket came 3 promotional cards, along with a rule set explaining how the tournament would work. Interestingly, it explained that the tournament would be a multi-stage event, locked behind a number of star chips a player owned, where each duel a player could wager a number of star chips, and once they reached enough, they could progress onto the second round. For the fans of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, this rule set sounded immediately familiar. The way the event was described made it sound like you were stepping into the pages of the manga and getting to duel in Duelist Kingdom. Naturally, excitement exploded. And to top it off, the tournament was held at Tokyo Dome, the biggest indoor stadium in Japan with a max capacity of 55,000 people. The venue had hosted the likes of Michael Jackson and the Rolling Stones. The fact that Yu-Gi-Oh's first major tournament was being held at a stadium like this really sold the prestige of the event. But strangely enough, what drew attention to the tournament wasn't actually the tournament itself, but something else entirely. A special limited edition booster pack was announced to be available at the tournament, titled Premium Pack. And if you missed out on buying a pack at this tournament, then it would never appear again. The mini set itself was nothing too interesting. It was mainly pack filler, and contained either normal monsters or effect monsters. Out of the vanillas, the most powerful of them was Cosmo Queen, a 2-tribute 2900 attacker. It also had 3 effect monsters with Time Wizard and Goddess of Whim, but they weren't great, as they were gamble cards with the mediocre payoff and devastating downsides, with the final effect monster being Exodia. On August 19th, a special announcement was made in Shonen Jump. Instead of anyone who received an invitation being allowed to show up to the event, anyone who brought a copy of Shonen Jump would be allowed to spectate, but they wouldn't be allowed to participate in a tournament. There was just a small problem with this change. Shonen Jump was everywhere, and by everywhere, I really do mean everywhere. In 1999, it was one of the highest circulation magazines in the entire country. You could get a copy almost everywhere, in convenience stores, train stations, bookstores, supermarkets. If a place sold paper, it was bound to have copies of Shonen Jump. And if by some chance a store didn't have it, it usually meant that week's copies had been sold out. For male teenagers, Shonen Jump was practically ubiquitous, and if you're aware of the Tokyo Dome tournament, you almost certainly had that week's copy of Shonen Jump available. In practical terms, this announcement basically implied, if you're aware of this event, you're welcome to come. Which was a nice idea in theory, as now anyone could buy a premium pack, but it turned out that the announcement worked very well. A bit too well. These videos take a lot of work and energy to make, so if you're enjoying the video and want to help support the channel, why not subscribe? And if you want to go an extra step further, why not check out my Patreon, where I'll be posting previews of upcoming videos, and you can also get your name in the credits of future videos. On August 26th, the floodgates were open. Children, exhausted parents, scalpers, and overgrown men all descended upon Tokyo Stadium like a tidal surge, all allured by the promise of fresh cardboard. While the main event was intended to be the tournaments, unsurprisingly, the side attraction, the premium pack, was what everyone was lining up for. In fact, barely anyone cared about the tournament. As far as the majority of the people in the stadium were concerned, they were only there for one thing. The inside of the stadium was completely filled, and rapidly reached the 55,000 max capacity, and to make matters worse, the temperature on that day was around 90 Fahrenheit, 32 Celsius for the Europeans. And with tens of thousands of bodies all packed to one space, the stadium started acting like a pressure cooker. The sale of the premium pack was scheduled to start at 12:30, but by around 11:30, around 25,000 people were already crowding around the sales booth, and it appeared that Konami had not anticipated the demand for the cards, as to service the entire stadium, they had one single vendor. And so, when the scheduled time arrived, with the hordes of people overwhelming the staff, the sale of the packs was postponed till 1:30 in the hopes that the armies of cardboard fiends would diminish. They did not. By 1:30, the mob of players was visibly mentally deteriorating. Many people had arrived as early as 9 AM, in an effort to get ahead of the crowd, but it appeared that thousands of other people had that same thought.
9時に来てずっと待たされ5時間も待たされてもらえなかった。
Now, after nearly 5 hours in the suffocating heat, patience was wearing thin. The idea of an orderly line was just a foreign concept, with there just being what could only be described as a mass of humans pressed shoulder to shoulder. And this was still years before the dawn of the iPhone, so no digital screen to numb the wait, which led to a lot of angry children. There was also lack of communication from the organizers, and with the situation seemingly making no progress, rumors began spreading through the crowd like a game of telephone, leading to even more confusion of what was going on. To make matters worse, there were reports of multiple children suffering from heat stroke due to the long waits, and at around 1:30 PM, after many hours of withstanding the summer heat, a staff member finally addressed the crowd. Chaos ensued. The collective of sweaty, angry people immediately slapped at once. What had been a tense situation turned openly hostile as anger boiled over at how badly the sale had been handled. According to one user who attended the tournament at the time, after the announcement, one man in the hallway shouted, and pushed his way toward the exit, presumably knocking a couple kids like pins on his way out. And to the thousands of people in the crowd, this announcement was a severe act of injustice. The anger and disappointment was so strong that the crowd did not disperse. The horde of players were unwilling to accept that the hours of waiting had all gone to waste. Up until now, I've only been focusing on what was happening inside the stadium, but as it turned out, the situation outside the stadium was just as bad. While the interior had already reached its 55,000 limit, unbeknownst to many of the players inside the stadium, there was still another 10,000 people gathered outside, packed around the entrances with no clear information about what was happening within. Crucially, with the people outside having no way of knowing that their sales had been halted, many assumed that if they waited long enough, eventually their efforts would get rewarded. But after the announcement inside, people within the stadium tried to leave all at once, and at the same time the thousands of people outside were still pressing inward, unaware of the situation inside. This resulted in a surge of people being crowded, and even if you wanted to leave, you couldn't.
これ現地にいたけどドーム内の通路で圧死するかと思った。生きてて命の危険を感じたのはこれと震度6の地震だけ。後からレプリカが誰でも買えるようになってがっかりした。
The mob became so violent that the 80 riot police were called to deal with thousands of angry protesters. According to the deputy police chief, Futoshi Okamura, he had never seen an uproar like this. By the end of the incident, 2 people had been hospitalized, with dozens more treated at medical clinics inside the stadium. People were so mad that even during the night, there were still thousands of people protesting. In the aftermath of the event, a representative from Konami would make a statement about the riot. And in an effort to appease the thousands of angry players, they also revealed that anyone who could provide proof of attendance to the event through mail order would receive the pack. But Konami even screwed up the compensation, as people were finding loopholes in obtaining their packs. If you had multiple star chips, you could send it one at a time to get more copies than intended. Oh, and the 2 tournaments, the entire reason this event was held, they were cancelled after the first round due to the number of people there. No one even knows any of the deck lists used, a tiny footnote in comparison to the disaster on that day. While Exodia did cause a full-scale riot and left a stain on the game, the only saving grace was that the damage stopped there. In case you're one of the 4 people who don't know what Exodia does, Exodia is a set of 5 cards where if you manage to assemble all 5 pieces in your hand, you instantly win the game. Exodia is one of the most iconic cards in the entire game, and it's not hard to see why. It's simple enough to understand and incredibly luring with its unique effect. The idea of being able to win, even in your first hand, sounds enticing, but there's just one problem. It's not a very consistent way to win. Unless you have all 5 pieces in your hand, individually you have 5 blank cards in your deck which do very little. In a scenario where you're facing down a Blue Eyes Dragon with only 2 cards left in your hand, drawing the left arm wasn't exactly a way to get you out of trouble.
This card is useless.
So the only competitive way to play Exodia is by building a deck totally around drawing all 5 pieces, either of stall cards or draw cards. And with the limited card pool at the time of Exodia's release, there weren't enough cards to fully focus on drawing and stalling. So if you're using Exodia in your deck, you're forced to play a mixture between the Exodia style and the other powerful cards you could get your hands on. As a result, for a brief short period after the release of 5 pieces of Exodia, the cards competitively were doing very little, but that all changed with the release of 3 important cards in the coming months. On November 18th, Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest were the first 2 important cards released after Exodia, which supported the playstyle. Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest both had similar effects, where after being sent to the grave, you'd be able to grab a monster with low stats from your deck to your hand, which had a natural synergy with the Exodia pieces. If you're familiar with the TCG version of the card, the original version was even more broken, as the search effect happened any time the monster was sent to the grave, including when it was discarded, which meant that the cost of discarding a Sangan off of Graceful Charity wasn't really a cost, as you could search for a piece of Exodia while getting free draws on top of that. That being said, Witch of the Black Forest and Sangan still didn't make Exodia truly degenerate. Even with both of these cards, Exodia decks only won on the first turn, roughly 10 to 20% of the time, which sounds like a lot but is relatively small, as with the next card that got released, that number would skyrocket almost overnight. On December 16th, Last Duel was released, and it was released in an even more broken state than either Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest ever were. Last Duel had the effect of, instead of 1 monster being sent to the grave this turn, 1 monster with 1500 attack power or less can be put on the field from the deck. Due to the vague wording, along with Konami's clear inexperience with balancing card effects, with the instead of wording, every time a monster was sent to the grave this turn, you could get 1 summon for every monster this turn. And when you used it with Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest, you could infinitely summon a monster from your deck by suicide attacking with your Sangan or Witch of the Black Forest into an opponent's monster. And upon their destruction, you'd get a piece of Exodia every time. But with Last Duel's effect applying for the entire turn, you could repeat this 4 more times to get all 5 pieces. An important important thing to know is that Last Will's effect worked even when you discarded a monster. So, one Graceful Charity could convert into 2 more monsters, special summoned to the field. This was a devastating combo. That the idea of even summoning a monster in attack position was a risk, as it meant you could lose on the next turn. And if by some miracle your Exodia got discarded, the deck had another FDK in its bag of tricks, with Cannon Soldier, as that card too could abuse Last Will. As you tribute a monster to burn an opponent for 500 attack, Last Will special summons another monster from your deck, rinse and repeat until you win the game. You also have to understand, in 1999, the idea of a one-turn kill was absurd. It's not something a player in that time would even have considered. Even a win by turn 5 was considered infrequent. And out of the entire card pool, there are only 4 cards to somewhat deal with this combo. Magic Jammer and Solemn Judgment could negate the activation of Last Will, but that was just a stopgap. Morphing Jar and Needleworm could potentially discard copies of Exodia to the grave, but this was heavily based on luck. And like I mentioned before, Cannon Soldier was still an extremely viable backup strategy. To make matters worse, Pot of Greed, Graceful Charity, and Exodia pieces were all available at free copies, so your opponent would need to discard every copy of a piece for the discard effect to do anything substantial. To understand how absurd this was, I think it's easier to show you.
Oh, this hand is oh,
Graceful Charity. I'm gonna pitch Witch and Sangan and trigger their respective effects. And I will add to my hand 2 pieces of Exodia. And show
I didn't even play the fucking game! I didn't even get to draw a card! Oh my god! You made 1 move! You played 1 card! Oh my god!
All of this is to say that Exodia decks were objectively by far the best deck in the format. It was also miserable to play against, as there was no counterplay, and the only way you would win is if your opponent by some miracle managed to start with a bad hand. To call any match involving an Exodia deck a duel was inaccurate, as the game for the Exodia player was essentially just an easier version of Solitaire. In a life imitates art situation, despite Takahashi creating Exodia as a way to symbolize the power of unity and friendship, the same archetype of villain that Exodia faced off against was wreaking havoc on any Japanese schoolchild for their thinking that they could be like Yugi. Konami, fearing that Exodia had ruined Yu-Gi-Oh! In more ways than one, knew they had to retain a remaining player base, so the Exodia strategy was gutted. On December 21st, in an issue of the weekly Shonen Jump, an errata was made to both Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest, changing their search effects to only work when sent from the field to the grave, killing off the Graceful Charity combo. The other came with the dawn of the millennium. On February 2000, Pot of Greed, Graceful Charity, Last Will, along with the 5 pieces of Exodia were limited to 1 copy, killing the insane consistency of the deck, and significantly reducing the chances of the Last Will combo. These alterations all but killed the dominance of the Exodia deck, reverting the meta back to decks being filled with generic powerful cards. While Exodia still managed to hold on to its meta relevance with other future versions of the deck, its reign as a tier 0 deck was over. The collective trauma left by Exodia was so significant that when Exodia finally released in a TCG, it had been limited to 1 copy, in the TCG's very first Forbidden Unlimited list, despite never having found any meta-relevant success there. The Exodia fiasco also appeared to not reflect too well on the eyes of Kazuki Takahashi either, as during the Battle City arc, the very first person Yugi dueled was the Seeker, a character with many similarities with the meta players who played Exodia. In the manga, the Seeker also wielded multiple counterfeit copies of Exodia, and used a strategy not too dissimilar to the real-life OCG decks, relying on Graceful Charity and Stall cards to optimize drawing all 5 pieces. But the portrayal of the Seeker wasn't exactly a flattering one, as upon the Seeker's defeat, it's revealed that he was by far the weakest of the evil henchmen's group, which may have reflected Kazuki Takahashi's contempt at the real-life meta players who had perverted his game. A fitting footnote to the saga of the Exodia riots is that history would repeat itself, albeit significantly less disastrous, when Konami began a 10-day-long livestream countdown for the 25th anniversary of the game. Naturally, fans were hyped to see what Konami had in store for the quarter-century anniversary, maybe a new series anime, a GX movie, hell, even a special anniversary set that would come with 25 cards.
I will say this, dude. If a new anime or movie gets announced, I am going nuts. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Are they announcing a big tournament?
They are.
The
Legend of Duelists 2024.
2024. This could have been a Facebook post.
Yes.
All the hype and speculation amounted to an announcement that players would get to duel at a tournament held in the Tokyo Dome during the 25th anniversary. In a way, this announcement mirrored the 1999 incident, where people are upset at the disappointment of the announcement after a long period of time. But this time, at least the riot was contained virtually. Players around the globe were disappointed with the announcement of being a tournament that would be inaccessible to them, especially after a 10-day countdown implying something big. Hell, even Japanese players were upset since not everyone lived near Tokyo. But in a twist of irony, while the 2024 Tokyo event was celebrating the 25th anniversary of Yu-Gi-Oh!, it also happened to be the anniversary of the riots, and is maybe as an act of closing the book on the past. Alongside the tournament, Konami announced they were selling a special pack with a familiar name, familiar packaging, containing, well, you can probably guess what card that was.
Yo! No freaking way!
While I have mentioned that Exodia was never meta relevant in the TCG, this isn't to say that it had never done anything substantial. In fact, one of the most famous duels in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually had Exodia beat the best deck and format live on stage. So click on this video if you want to check that out.